Hello everybody, welcome back. We are here today to deliver you another podcast episode.
I thought you were going to say to deliver you a message.
To deliver you a message of freedom.
A message of hope for the people out there listening.
That's probably the most rogue start to a podcast we've done so far. But we're back, guys. And we've got a bit of a beast today.
Yeah. So we are going to cut to the chase and dive. We always say that, dive in.
I feel like we always also say that it's like a big topic.
Yeah, we always say we're back. We always say it's a big topic. We always say we're going to dive in. So if anyone's got any alternative phrases that we could use, what's the alternative for dive in?
We're gonna jump in.
I'm sure we probably say
Just
that
trying to
as
think of all the different ways you can like get into water, really. Dive, jump, bomb.
We're gonna dive bomb.
We're gonna bomb in.
Cannonball.
No. We're gonna pencil jump into this episode.
Belly flop into this episode.
Imagine if we just said that just so normally, like, yeah, today we're gonna tuck jump into today's episode. Straight in the deep end. But we are in the deep end today, guys.
We're belly flopping in.
What is today's episode, Soph?
So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about how it's not just you that struggles to have difficult conversations. Have I said that right?
Yeah.
I've not got it up
it's
on my
not just
phone.
you who finds difficult conversations hard.
Sorry.
Basically, we're chatting tricky, awkward conversations, be it with a friend, a colleague,
Be it with a friend,
a family member, a
teacher.
stranger.
It could be a teacher.
Oh gosh, crucial with a stranger.
It could be a neighbour.
Throughout this episode, we may refer to them as crucials. I don't really know why, like, a crucial conversation has become a bit of a phrase for us. I think there is a general concept out there. You know, some people call these kind of conversations crucial conversations. There's quite a lot of research into it, I think.
Oh, is there now?
Yeah, and different ways to have them. But we have kind of got into this habit over the years of calling them a crucial, haven't we?
I think mostly influenced by one of our friends. As in, I had never used it until I heard them say it. So, you know, if you get a text saying, oh gosh, just had to have a crucial today.
Yeah.
It's been a tough day.
We're talking an awkward, tense conversation.
I think...
Actually, they don't have to be awkward and tense.
They don't.
That's what we're going to debunk today.
I love debunking myths.
I love debunking myths. But it means you've gone in for a potentially tricky conversation.
Yeah. And, you know, even if the conversation goes well, even the build-up can just be exhausting.
It can.
Knowing the conversation's coming, knowing that you're going to have to say something that might be a bit difficult to say. Mm-hmm. So even if it goes well, the whole thing can just be quite tiring, I think, sometimes.
Yes, it can.
But yes, that's what we're going to be chatting about today.
All things crucial.
So where do we begin?
I think we should begin by saying that... Well, I'm just going to throw it out there. I am a big advocate for this type of conversation.
You are?
I am not going to deny that they can sometimes be really hard. And yeah, I think how easily these conversations go is dependent on a whole range of factors. It's not just like whether you want to have a good conversation or not. It's the culture, it's the individual you're talking to, it's how they respond to conflict, all those kind of things. But my overarching opinion would be, is it overarching or overarching? Yeah, overarching.
Arch over that.
I'm just an advocate for saying things when they need to be said and getting them out of your head and into the open and talking about the things that are sometimes challenging, because I think more often than not, it's more damaging sometimes to leave things unsaid and let them build up. Yeah, generally speaking. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I am also a firm believer in having the difficult conversation. I would say it maybe doesn't come as naturally. My personal opinion, and some people might think otherwise, I think I'm quite good in these conversations. When I get there, when I'm in the conversation, I feel confident to share my thoughts, feel like I can articulate myself. I actually quite enjoy having those conversations, and I don't mind it once I'm there. Can just find it quite difficult to initiate or even acknowledge, oh gosh, yeah, I am going to have that conversation, and maybe potentially can sometimes take a bit of convincing as to,
yes,
you know, oh, Soph, you should have that conversation. I'm like, oh, I don't really want to.
Why do you think that is? Because I think it kind of makes more sense if someone's like, oh, because then again, you know, when I'm in the conversation, I hate it and I freeze up and I can't speak and I can't, you know, express how I feel. But I would agree, you're great in those conversations. So what is it about the initiating that you don't like?
I think I'm realizing something about myself.
Oh, a realization.
Yeah, a revelation of who I am. Well, what I'm realizing is that I don't really like to make things feel awkward.
Same.
But I think from a different perspective from you.
Okay.
In the sense of, I know we've had all these chats about how you hate awkwardness and all of that. I don't mind awkwardness when it's happening, and I think basically I don't like to be the one that's creating awkwardness, if that makes sense. So by having this conversation or bringing up something that is a bit like, oh, you've taken that conversation off on a different turn or a different tangent, or oh, that's not a very lighthearted conversation that we could be having now with, you know, you're bringing up all this stuff. I think I don't like being that person that has to do that. Like, again, if someone brought it up with me, so happy to engage with the conversation, so happy to have it. I think again, I'm realizing that I quite like having this image, or not even image, or people, I think more just for people to feel like, oh, so chill and easygoing and not intense. And in reality, it can be intense having to bring up those conversations.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like it goes into that thing that you've said before of like wanting to be chill.
Yeah.
Or like in a group, you know, kind of, yeah, be a laid back person, not... Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think that's why. But like I said, once I'm there, I'm flying. It's just getting there.
And do you think that the conversations like that sometimes are necessary though, just to like stop something from building up?
Oh yeah, 100%. But again, I think sometimes I can convince myself that it will be fine, just let it go.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh no, if we address it, then actually that might give me more insight into how they're thinking, and we can move forward with things better and not just do the whole kind of sweep it under the rug thing.
We've all had it though, where you do try and do that and you're like, okay, what that person's just said has really annoyed me or like upset me, but you know, I can't be bothered to engage with it. I can't be bothered to, you know, have a whole conversation about it. So I'm just going to like let it go. But then like, I don't know, a couple weeks later, a couple months later, something happens and you're like transported back to that moment. Do you know what I mean? Or where you think you've kind of moved on. And I do think there are times and places for just letting something go. Like if we all challenged every person every time that we felt annoyed, I think it would just be constantly challenging people, or I would be. But like, if you try and let it go, but like you haven't actually, I think that's when it can just get a bit tricky. So do you feel like we've had conversations like this?
I do. Yeah, I think we wanted to bring in a real life example of where we've had to have a conversation that were difficult, tricky, awkward. And we've had many. We've had many a conversation.
We've had many. Probably also, what's the word? Can't think of the word, but made more by the fact that we work together.
Yeah, I think pre-Soph and Rach, pre-doing YouTube, pre-doing podcast, I don't know. We'd had a couple.
And I think...
But yeah, I think us working together increased.
Yeah, although to be honest, like, yeah, I think by this point, even if we weren't working together, I can think of some of our conversations like this that have been nothing to do with work.
Yeah. They're not all been
they're
work
just
related.
friendship related. But yeah, I do think we probably have more as well because we're working together. Not just friends, but colleagues.
Yeah. Can you think of one in particular that you would care to share?
I can think of conversations, I think you referenced this earlier, but around like working style that we've had. But I'm trying to think of...
I think the probably biggest one we've had was that one on, I think it was like Good Friday, like
yeah,
bank
the
holiday
bank holiday.
Friday.
But I was trying to work out I think what happened was I said something that annoyed you. You went quiet but didn't bring it up, but your whole demeanor changed.
I think I had been working.
So I was like,
I remember I'd come to your flat. I think I'd been working on a reel or some piece of content or something.
Yeah.
And then basically from my perspective was probably just feeling a bit like insecure anyway, and we'll in the rest of the conversation it makes sense, but essentially just felt like I'd done this thing and then Rach had kind of just taken it and changed it, or it wasn't good enough or something like that. So then that had upset me and made me feel annoyed. But then yeah, like Rach said, I think I can also be a bit of a not necessarily slow processing, and obviously I can tell I'm upset, but I think then just working out how to bring that up in a conversation and what to share and what not to share.
Especially when it's just happening
but
as
obviously
well.
when it's a live thing and you're like, oh, that's just really upset me or really annoyed me. Obviously, you kind of, your demeanor changes, like you said. So then it is just obvious to Rach. But I don't feel like I've kind of gathered my thoughts enough to be able to coherently explain why that thing has really annoyed me. So you kind of just, I don't know, there was maybe like half an hour of us just carrying on, but I was just annoyed. And then
then it led, or then I then asked, which I guess is in this context then the initiation of a conversation like this, where it's like, yeah, you're just gonna call out what you see or whatever and be like, what's wrong, like I can't really remember. And then it led into a big conversation about our working styles, really, I think, or basically just giving more context behind. Obviously, in that instance, Soph had been annoyed, or like, had felt like upset that I'd then changed things. And then I remember going into a conversation of like my reasoning behind doing that, and like my thinking behind it in terms of me changing things, wasn't in a way of undermining Soph or thinking any less of her ability, but because of X, Y, and Z. And then obviously as the conversation goes on, you're both just getting way more clarity behind how each other are thinking and acting.
Yeah. But to be fair, I would say that was one of the conversations that I think we've had conversations like that where it's maybe been like, I don't know, 15, 20 minute conversation, but I'd say this one probably was like a good 2 hours.
Yeah. On a walk around Birmingham.
And it wasn't, I think the thing is with us is that we're very similar in a lot of ways, but I think it wasn't until doing Soph and Rach and actually working together that we realised that we're actually quite different in a lot of ways as well. And almost the having to work together piece was actually the thing that was almost bringing out our differences, that's where our differences in our personalities, like you say, in our working styles really showed as we started to do this project together and work on it.
Yeah.
Both of us.
And it's like, if we didn't have open conversations about that when each other got annoyed or whatever, there'd just be no hope for like the continuation of working together, would there?
No.
Like because if you didn't express how you were feeling in that moment, and then I just continued to critique or change things, obviously you would just get more and more upset without expressing it until there'd probably be some kind of big blow up, like
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, and like the whole thing would just like crumble.
Yeah, I think overall, to start the episode, we just wanted to say that, like you were saying, it's so important to have these conversations, whatever kind of relationship you're in, whether it's a friendship, a working relationship, parent, family, whatever it is. Because I think if you care about a person or want to see progress in what you're doing or move forward in things, you have to be on the same page, and you also have to be able to see things from their perspective and know how they're wired, because it's so easy to assume everyone thinks in the same way that you do, or or even just not really being able to know what someone's motives are unless they tell you. And it's always good to try and assume that they're good motives. But I think even like in that example of the reel and me making this reel and then feeling like Rachel changed it and all of this, in my brain, it's like, Rachel thinks I'm incompetent. She thinks that I'm rubbish at doing stuff. Like, she just wants to do it herself. What's the point in me even doing anything to contribute towards it? And actually, in the conversation, kind of was able to clarify actually where she was coming from and her intentions in doing that.
And I think my thinking was like, oh, it's a team effort. Like, so rather than, both of us trying our best, it's like we come together as a team. So me then editing something that you'd already made was like, in my head, making the best content that we could together as a team. But then obviously when you then hear someone else's perspective, you're like, oh, I can see how that came across like that. Yeah. So it's like, it's just all like, I think with these kind of conversations, it's just all about hearing someone else's perspective and understanding how different people think differently to you. And it's really kind of clarifying when you like basically have space for each person to express how they interpret something, because then you're like, oh, that isn't how I meant that at all. But now I understand like why that could have upset you. And like my way of thinking isn't always right. And actually I need to be aware of how something can come across for someone else. So it's like, it's basically just really interesting, if anything, like in terms of like, oh, like that upset you because of that and that. Whereas I didn't mean it like that at all. And that would never have crossed my mind that would have upset you. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's interesting.
Yeah. But why do you think it can be difficult to have these conversations? Like, why aren't they just happening all the time?
Yeah.
Part of everyday life? Why do they feel like these big things that we have to approach?
Yeah, I think like sometimes, I mean, obviously we're talking in the context of our friendship where, we have wanted to over the years like have these kind of honest conversations, but obviously that isn't always the case. Sometimes you may be someone that really wants to have a conversation, but the friend or the person you're trying to have it with isn't. So there's definitely a piece of like the culture that you're in and like whether or not that's something that's established and like open and like easy to do, or whether it's the opposite.
Yeah. Because I'm just imagining, say you start working somewhere and you're really used to being in a space where there's really healthy conflicts. You can have conversations that are more difficult and people won't take offense. It's just part of everyday life. And then you come into a new workplace and either that's not communicated from your boss or your line manager or, from the other team members there, or you just don't see it happening. And so suddenly oh, that was a really natural thing for me to do. And it was really part of my old working environment. I've just stepped into a new workplace and it feels like that would be totally disturbing the peace for me to have a conversation like that, because it's just not happening. And that's not the culture of this place. Or like say a friendship, it might not have been something that you've ever had to do with a particular friend. And so you're like, I have no idea how they're going to take this.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in those instances, you might have to just push through and almost become like that culture setter. Like, yeah, I like even to some extent, I think over the years in our friendship, because that's one thing that I find slightly easier. Like I've probably made that more of a thing for us of like, well, if I'm going to talk about things that I'm thinking about to Soph, then hopefully that then creates space for you to then talk about things you feel to me. So it's like, just because like a culture may not immediately welcome it doesn't mean that over time it can't.
Yeah. And then I think something else that's so easy to do is just totally overthink what the conversation is going to be like and put this image in your head that, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to them, they're going to start shouting at me, or they're going to completely shut down. Yeah. They're not going to understand what I'm saying. I'm not going to be able to communicate my point. There's going to be a massive fallout. They're going to stop being my friend. And you've built up this image of what the conversation is going to go like, and you've not even had it. And then in doing that, it's become way more of a scary thing to approach because, there's been this real negative viewpoint put on, you know, you've put this negative viewpoint on the conversation. And, you know, I can't sit here and 100% say, no, anytime you enter into one of these conversations, they are going to go really well. But I do often think we can make them out to be way worse than they actually are going to be.
Yeah.
And you can go down all these thought tunnels of how they're going to react and what it's going to be like. Firstly, you just don't know until you do it. But I do often think that they end up going better than you think they would. Not always. And like I said, I can't sit here and say that. And sometimes you have these conversations and they're awful and they go really badly. But I do think a lot of the time it's not as bad as you might think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you've had bad experiences previously, that can sometimes, which is like, makes so much sense. Like, let's say you've gone to have a conversation with someone and it's gone awfully. That can just be like then quite hard to get over. But I think again in that you've just got to remember every person is so different, and actually how someone reacts in a conversation a lot of the time is more reflective on them than it is on you. If you've gone into the conversation, you know, with the best intentions and you've gone about it in what you feel like is a really polite and kind of healthy way, and someone turns around and reacts awfully, I wouldn't say that's a huge reflection on you.
No.
So therefore, like, you know, going into another conversation after a bad experience, you've almost just got to start again a little bit, which can be really hard, but kind of just try and not have any expectations and just like, you know, try and speak well.
Yeah. And just a couple of things that have come to mind. One, I think it can be really helpful to have a friend or someone almost to just vet what you're about to say. Because I think sometimes when you're feeling hurt or upset about stuff, you can maybe share things that are actually not going to be helpful in the conversation and maybe be more like accusatory or just essentially be unhelpful to that conversation. And so I think it can be good to have an external opinion of someone who can go, really think that you've clearly communicated in this part and this is what you should say, but actually maybe that thing is for you to work out with someone else or process with someone else. They don't actually need to hear your thoughts on that thing or in that area. And then the second thing, I think, I mean, in the example we gave, that was quite a live example of something happening in the moment and then having to have a conversation immediately off the back of it. I think if you can, and this is my personal opinion, I don't know if I think you maybe would actually think differently, but I think depending on the situation, if you can have time to go away, think about what you want to say, even just cool off, like if something's happened in the moment, your initial thoughts maybe aren't going to be the same as if you go away, think about it and then come back. And so if you can try and create a bit of a gap between something happening and having a conversation, I think that can also be quite helpful. Because like I said, it also gives space for you to go to a friend and maybe talk it through what you're going to say.
Particularly if it's like even like a work conversation, and, you know, I think that's time sometimes can be really important to work out what's rational here and what's irrational. I just think sometimes the only like danger, I guess, with that is that you go away and then you almost lose momentum with the situation and you never bring it up. And sometimes that is right. Sometimes it might be right just to move on. But also it's like, I think because these conversations can be difficult, you just have to be so intentional about having them. Yeah,
because I've had it where I've essentially talked myself out of having the conversation. Like, I overreacted. It's me. I'm the one that's insecure. I'm the one that's the problem. So I just need to get over it on my own. And, you know, like I said, there are moments where maybe it is a you thing to do or to do with a friend. But you've got to be careful to actually not talk yourself out of it and still commit to having the conversation. I think that is really important.
Yeah. And then I guess just to end, when it comes to the practicals of actually having these conversations, we've, I guess, found or discussed with friends, one particular friend, the king of crucials, 5 steps that are like really useful for having these kind of conversations. So I'll just quickly read them out and we can just quickly go through them. But 5 steps for having a difficult conversation well would be: number 1, start with your heart. So kind of share your heart behind the conversation, explain that you've got good intentions behind it. So that could be, that you just want your friendship to be healthy, or that you love them and therefore you want to communicate what you're about to say. Number 2, make it safe. So by that, I mean, don't go in angry or annoyed. Try and go in calm. Pick a non-hostile place to have the conversation, like somewhere that's just quite
What would be a hostile
neutral,
place?
I don't know. Or like
neutral ground.
Yeah, neutral
maybe more
ground. So. I'm thinking like a breakup, like maybe don't have it in one of your houses. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I was just like, a hostile place.
Yeah. And then like try and be clear with what you're saying in that. Number 3, state your intention. So state kind of what you want to get out of the chat, or why you're having the chat, in terms of like,
not
it's
just
not
for
just
the sake of assassinating someone's character.
Exactly.
And then, that's me done.
Number 4, share the facts. So this is the part where I guess you explain why you want to have the conversation and what it is that's upset you. But interestingly, in this, sometimes it's helpful to try and state facts over feelings. So, for example, the fact is you acted in a way that caused this, or the fact is you agreed to do one thing and then you did another. And I think within that you can then go into, and therefore that's how it made you feel. But often it can help someone understand where kind of they've gone wrong when you literally outlay, well, you said this or you did this. Like, that is just a fact. And then finally, number 5, move to action. So try and end the conversation by sharing how you feel you can best move forward. So, to avoid this happening again, let's do this, or I just need to understand this, or it's good to hear this, so that it's kind of a productive end.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, so that's kind of the ideal way to have a conversation. Don't think it always plays out like that. But I think out of all of those things, I think for me personally, what's been quite helpful is in these conversations to kind of try and constantly weave into it why you're having the conversation. Because the reality is someone will just get really defensive. Like, if you're coming to someone and you're saying, you've made me feel like this, the immediate reaction for a lot of people is like defense up, like, no, I haven't, that's not how I meant it, like, why are you saying that? And I think in that, something that's really disarming is just to keep saying like, yeah, no, the only reason I want to talk to you about this is because I care about our friendship, and I don't want to be withholding anything, or like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's true, because most of the time, if someone who's an acquaintance to you does something that's annoying or hurts you, it's probably not really worth having. It's kind of just one of those things where you're like, well, that annoyed me.
Yeah.
But I don't care enough to necessarily go and, take an hour out of my day to have a conversation with them about it. So you actually are only there because you want to see your friendship move forward, or your relationship move forward in whatever capacity. Yeah, I think that's really key.
Yeah. And then I think when you're receiving it as well, like even like I've just touched on where you can get defensive, you do have to try. And I think I'm actually like learning this more and more. I think even with in conversations with people like my brother, like, and I would say he's quite like this as well, but like we can just both immediately jump to, that's not what I meant. Like, but actually trying not to be defensive, or trying to actually, which I think is such a skill, to like just listen and take criticism and be like, okay, like I hear you, I understand. Even if that's not how you meant something, that is how the person feels.
And you can't deny that. Like, even if you're 100% adamant, I never intended for that. Okay, well, that's how you've made a person feel, and you have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And it's knowing that, yeah, that doesn't make you a horrible, malicious person.
Yeah.
That's not what they're necessarily saying. They're just saying, probably inadvertently, something that you've done has just upset me or annoyed me or made me feel this way. And I think what's really helpful, even in communicating maybe how someone's made you feel, is when you're talking about saying the facts, you've got the facts of the thing and then what that's made you feel. I think even just saying, rather than using that accusatory, like, and you made me feel like this, like almost trying to be a bit more, I guess, language like, oh, and this is just how it made me feel. Like, do you know what I mean? Rather than kind of almost putting it on them like it was this intentional, thought out thing. Like, this is what you did. And, from my perspective, this is how it made me feel. And it maybe even just adding on, I don't know if that was your intention. I don't think it was, but I just want you to know that is the message it's communicated, or that's the feelings it's provoked in me.
Yeah. And I think finally, again, if you're receiving this kind of conversation, just trying to like think the best of that person and like trying to kind of have understanding and patience and grace. And even if they're saying something you don't think it makes, like, the actual worst thing in these kind of conversations, let's say you're saying the hard thing, is when the other person is almost just like trying not to understand you, or like trying to like almost catch you out with your words, or because I actually think it can be quite brave to have these kind of conversations and, share something that's like vulnerable that you've felt upset by. And I just think if you're on the other side, try and support your friend in that, or the person in that, and try and hear them out, even where it might be hurtful to you. Like, actually, like, we've all been there where you're sat opposite someone and their face is just like looking as if they're not understanding one thing that's coming out of your mouth, and it's quite discouraging. Like, try and help them out, even as they're coming at you.
And it's really simple. People say it all the time, but just put yourself in their shoes. I think it's so easy to approach these things of like, you're on your side and I'm on my side, but actually, okay, let me actually think about this from their perspective, put myself in their shoes in that moment. Do you know what? I can kind of see how that's maybe how it's come across. It makes it so much easier. And it seems like such a simple thing to do, but I feel like I actually rarely do it. I'm trying to do it more and actually think about things from other people's perspectives. But it's actually just so helpful. When you properly do it, it's such a helpful tool, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Brilliant. A deep dive on crucial conversations.
Yeah. And guys, we are by no means experts.
Oh yeah, probably should have said that at the start.
I've had lots of conversations where I've probably gone too far, said too much stuff that's like, just attacking someone's character, and I'm hurt, so I'm just going in, or I'm receiving it and I'm like, no, I didn't do that, and got my guard up. And so with these things, it's
a learning curve.
Trying to learn, trying to get better,
trying to get a little bit better each time.
Trying to do your best. Yeah,
it's not always how it goes, but
here we are. Yeah. Well, we hope that something in that was helpful, insightful.
I hope you all go and have some great, difficult conversations now.
Yeah, maybe there's someone listening who thinks, I know I need to have one of those conversations now.
I've been putting it off.
Someone's come to mind. This is for you. This is your little nudge to go and have that conversation. Yeah. We'll draw it to a close there, I think.
We will.
We shall.
All right, guys. See you in our next episode.
Happy conversations, guys. Enjoy
Happy
those.
crucials. Bye.